Welcome to Great Lakes Bonsai, formerly Bonsai Brad. You probably haven't watched my other videos. I only have two. They were far-ranging and sporadic, and they kind of captured the first year or so of my interest in bonsai. About a year ago, I went out to the Redwood forest up in Humboldt County, 5 hours north of San Francisco, read The Secret Life of Trees, had already had a love for trees and fell in love with the redwoods themselves. Thought to myself, is there a way that I could have a coastal redwood here in Michigan? And went down the road of bonsai as a possibility. I will say that this guy behind me back here is a coastal redwood. You can just see the tips of it. And it did survive the winter. It's now pushing buds. I'll probably show you that in a minute. So it is possible. We'll see if it lives long term, but from that point I dove deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole that is bonsai. And as I'll show you in a minute, I've got several different projects going on, a lot of trees at different stages in their lives. Only a couple that are actually close to being full-fledged bonsai at this point, but the learning curve continues to be a fun ride, more than anything else. So, Great Lakes Bonsai. Why Great Lakes? I'm here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, Beer City, USA. I'll throw a map up. If you don't know what Michigan looks like, shame on you. We're just about as distinct looking as Hawaii or Alaska, and I'd say more so, considering we have two peninsulas, surrounded by the Great Lakes, of course. So hence Great Lakes Bonsai. I'm here to share with you my spring update on all of my material that I've been working on. Hopefully you find some of it interesting. If not, that's okay, but if you do, like and subscribe, because there's definitely more videos to come. Before we get to some of the most wonderful material that I have, that'll include some collective material and this beast of a Dawn Redwood that I purchased at Meyer Gardens only 3 weeks ago. This is my crown jewel. We'll get to that in a moment. Right now what I want to do is show you the different environments that I have going. So we've got some collective material in and out. We've got some pre-bonsai, and we'll cut over to that right now. We'll start on the east side of the house. This is actually a large tree that will be grown for future development. The distance off to our right here is west. So this side of the house is east, and thus morning sun with afternoon shade. The giant blue spruce up and to your left gives a lot of that shade. This is our first candidate we'll take a peek at here. It's a Trident Maple that I purchased from Fort Wayne, Indiana, our largest Trident, 2.5 inches across. We'll talk more about that later. We've got a little Dawn Redwood Grove from Brussels Bonsai. Some damage from shipping, but it's recovering nicely. In the shade again, try not to keep it traumatic. And a Crabapple that we'll talk about a little bit later. This one's very interesting. You can see those roots defined by the pot it was in. Cuttings from Dawn Redwoods, cuttings from American Elms, more Dawn cuttings, and the crown jewel that we'll talk about in just a moment. This is its place for now. Back to the backyard here. This is a full-grown Dawn Redwood, probably 7 years old. I've got two of these. This is the smaller of the two. I thought about using it for bonsai, but thought better, and it'll grow there for a while. We've got a new deck this spring. Definitely have spent a little bit of that tax refund. The maple tree you see there has been growing for 9 years, and there is the Dawn Redwood that is a little bit larger. You see it's tied to an opposing tree nearby because it was through an ice storm that I found the trunk nearly touching the ground. So repairing that damage. And here you see the raised beds that we've put in this spring. And here's the garden bed that you saw off to the left here. We've got a lot of different material in here, much of it for future development. Think of these projects as 7 to 10 years out. Twigs, growing, thickness. This is a Trident Maple, the smallest that we purchased from Fort Wayne. And it's doing well this spring. Went through a root prune, and it's recovering nicely, planted on top of a tile. You see Marley, my pup, in the background, and there is a Douglas fir for future development next to the Trident. And that's followed by a northern red oak. And a couple of other oaks here in the bed. These are bur oaks that were actually topped this spring, not by my choice, but by squirrels, and they're growing back nicely. And finally, a swamp white oak. These, again, are long-term projects. This is a Dawn Cypress I just bought, bald cypress I just purchased from Brussels Bonsai. It's got sun scald. We'll see if it recovers. I'm not optimistic, and neither am I optimistic about this viburnum. Nursery stock trimmed, but it's pushing buds. I don't know if it's going to make it. I love that root base, though. So that's the grow bed, if you will. Again, long-term project, 7 to 10 years, just to get that thickness started. The best way always is in the ground. And here is the raised bed section. Got some spruce seedlings there. We've got a Ficus nerophilia that's growing, a juniper down and to your right, a larch there in the grow box down and to your right, a collected ash tree, a couple of interesting pines called limber pines, the small ones, another Douglas fir, an eastern white cedar, another bur oak, and 2 jack pines that are doing quite well. Those that you see there are all slip potted. These are some Trident Maple cuttings that are doing quite well this spring, to my surprise. And finally, a coastal redwood. I talked about this and it's starting to push buds. It was indoors all winter. Adjusting from the grow light took about a month, and it's now starting to show that it's adjusted and push new growth. A few collected red pines I'll show you later. And then sandwiched between 2 bald cypress trees here is my hinoki cypress. My parents purchased this for me for Christmas. I need to repot it at some point. These are very tough to work with. And then, as I mentioned, the bald cypress. Both of these purchased from Brussels Bonsai. Hope they recover from sun scald well. Collected material, a trident I'll show you later, a maple seedling I found in my yard, a dawn redwood there in the center, and my amber maple that I'll give you more detail on as well. And there's the garden bed that we mentioned earlier. Okay, so you've seen the different growing areas that we've got going. Definitely all over the board, obviously, as far as how old my material is, but this is the oldest. I'm estimating about a 15-year-old dawn redwood. It's my favorite tree, even more so than the coastal redwood, because they grow naturally here in Michigan. They are a deciduous conifer, one of 3 different redwood species. You got the sequoias, the coastal redwoods out in California, both of them, growing throughout the year, and then the only other redwood is the metasequoia, the dawn redwood. So beautiful fall color, losing its leaves, and beautiful spring growth. These beautiful conifer needles. Looks a lot like a bald cypress. I purchased this at the Meyer Gardens Bonsai Show, all-state show. Full disclosure, a couple $100. It's the most I've ever spent on a tree, but I think it's well worth it. It's got some interesting carving here. And ultimately, this is going to be maybe 2-3 years from actually being show ready. So I'm really excited to work on this piece of material. At the same time, I'm slightly terrified to work on this material because it's so beautiful at this stage. So the carving, I think, will pick a front probably right in there, give or take. I like the movement up the trunk this way. I like to show some of that carving, which will turn a little bit darker with age. It's very fresh. So anyway, that's my crown jewel, the dawn redwood. We'll take a look at the crabapple now. I never thought I would own a crabapple bonsai, but apparently they propagate very well from root cuttings. As you can see, this ring around, and I'll show it on the detail cam, the ring around this was created by a pot. It was in a very shallow pot. Looked like it had been in there for a few years, so at some point it's gone under a root chop, and it's already on its way to becoming a bonsai. I love the thickness. I think we won't get it too much thicker than this. We'll start to do some refinement. It was out in the sun as well, just like with the dawn redwood. They came from the same merchant, so I'm thinking it was also in some shade, and it started to get some sun scald on the leaves, so we put it back into shade in the front there. But I love what this is doing. I think we definitely will be removing this at some point soon. It runs up here, it looks a little funky. I've got it in this wash basin, so I just slip potted it. Pretty simple, straightforward. Put a little bit of extra bonsai soil around the edge. This was a little bit bigger container. No root work, let it grow for a season, and then we'll get into actually trying to style this potentially into final form. Okay, so I've showed you a couple of pieces of material that I've purchased, but most of what bonsai is about is developing your own material. Those two are pretty close to being ready, maybe a couple of years out. This one's certainly farther out, and the couple other pieces that I'll show you here now are ones that I've actually put some work into, whether it's trunk chopping, whether it's collecting it from the wild, root pruning, and we'll see how these are responding. We'll start off with a piece of Trident Maple material that I picked up in Fort Wayne, Indiana. It's hard to find Trident Maple material, even though they're very suitable for bonsai and very popular with bonsai. And I found them on Facebook. It's 2.5 hours each way. It was worth it. I got 3 different trees. One in the garden bed over there that I showed you, one in a pot that I'll show you in a minute, and this guy, which is the thickest one, about 2.5 inches. So it's still got a ways to go, but it's got some nice movement. In the trunk, we'll be chopping it back, you know, into here at some point probably. but we're gonna let this just get healthy. This appeared to have a very healthy root system. And by the way, I'll be posting the video of the root chop, trunk chop, and just decimation that I did to this Trident on YouTube afterwards, and I'll try and provide a link to it in the comments. But we did a lot of work on this, put it through a lot of trauma. It was in a large nursery pot, and it looked like it was healthy. It had a big tap growing through the bottom and one other big root growing through the bottom. So you'd think a healthy root system, but when I got in there, I gotta tell you, compared to other things that I've collected and worked on, there was not a lot of fine roots. So on to collected material. I showed you one of the Tridents that I did some work on, but that was purchased, even though it's many years off. Collecting is an entire different ball game. I learned a lot from Appalachian Bonsai. If you haven't looked them up, he's outstanding. His aftercare techniques, I think, are what have saved all of my trees. I so far have a 100% success rate. This one isn't thriving, but the other pine is. This is a Pinus resinosa, a red pine. Beautiful when they're mature. They like the coasts of Lake Michigan. I collected this from my grandma's property out in Holland, Michigan, about 45 minutes from here. And you can see it's got some really interesting movement coming up out of the ground. It's about 1.5 inch thick, so we do have probably 5 to 10 years with which to work with this piece of material, but this was collected, dug out of the ground, sphagnum moss, the whole gig, and it's doing well. This is the other Pinus resinosa, again, red pine that I collected. You can see we've got a really healthy bud pop up here at the top, so we know it's doing well. Very limited needle loss on this one, and I like the potential. There's some deadwood up here from a main trunk that was cut. I think this could be something very interesting long term. Again, this is roughly the same size as that other one. So we've got a lot of work to do, a lot of development over the years, but right now we've got a lot of low growth, which is very important on pines because they don't backbud, if at all, easily. So we want to hang on to that low growth, and it's got some really interesting branching down this way that I'll show you in a moment. Ah, the mighty oak. And what kind of oak? We don't know yet. This was collected at another one of the properties that I asked permission for, happened to be my grandmother's as well, out in Holland, Michigan. And I was going for maybe a 2 to 3 inch tree that I had actually flagged in the fall for collection, and stumbled upon this thing right on the edge. It was so funky and dead looking that I didn't even notice it the first time. You can see that there's been a significant chop here, and the leaves are growing in so well now that it's hard to tell, but this is all deadwood from a main, maybe 3 inch thick leader that was cut, probably by my grandpa with the brush hog. And this piece of material is absolutely beautiful. Below the soil is where it gets even more interesting. So over time, we're going to be able to expose that natural, almost Yamadori-like, almost, still collected, but Nibari over time. I saw a lot of healthy growth on this tree despite that massive deadwood piece. There are plenty of shoots coming up on the right side and the left side. There's actually only one on the right side that was coming up, but this is all brand new growth out here. These two major shoots coming out are brand new this season from buds formed after collection, and this thing is absolutely kicking butt. The question is, what type of oak is it, and what side should we use for the front? So please feel free to comment on what you like better, leaning off to your left, or do you like it leaning off to your right? What a lovely sight and a victory for Great Lakes Bonsai on the interwebs. I took a lot of heat for this collection piece. I will show that along with the oak in a separate video. I'll try and put that in the comments again. Look at how vigorous this is. You can see there's a massive, massive trunk chop here, and I'll show it in the detail cam a little bit. You can see it better that way. But this thing was growing probably 15 to 20 feet out into a parking lot, and I'll show that in the collection video. Snaking down below as an understory tree and reaching out for some light. So there's only foliage on the last 5 feet of a 25-foot long tree. And looking at the root base, and I'll show that in a minute as well, I had to collect it. And if you take a look at the collection video, there were not a lot of fine roots when this puppy came out. And that was a risk I was willing to take. I also didn't know what species this was. But we're discovering now that this looks like an American elm. Very much so. Or a rock elm. It's down to 2 species, and you can tell it's doing absolutely incredible. Keep in mind, there were no buds on this thing. No foliage, nothing at all. I even have growth coming off the side here and making up for the lack of space over there. It's just so vigorous. It's done well. Again, aftercare is huge, and I can't wait to post this on the internet as a, you know, minor victory to those that criticized and called it the first dead stump of the season. All right, so this is my other Trident Maple. I showed you the first one that we did a lot of surgery on. This one, not so much. A little bit of root pruning, and that was about it. It did have a lot of fresh and healthy looking buds in dormancy, so I felt confident that I could do some work on it. If you take a look, it's in a 3-gallon pot, and it's doing quite well. So this is an ash tree that I collected from a property, again, out in Holland. And ash aren't terribly suitable for bonsai. They have compound leaves that are not terribly easy to reduce, but I do love how interesting this trunk is. There's a triple trunk that you see here. I may take this smaller one off at some point and focus on the more healthy, gnarly looking portion. There's a bunch of deadwood off this back end. And again, this thing is so incredibly healthy right now. It's survived the collection process quite well, and so we'll see what we do with that one long term. My favorite tree, we have a couple of these. I think I mentioned the Dawn Redwood forest that's growing in the shade over there, along with the crown jewel of the collection, the beautiful 15-year-old Dawn Redwood. This one's about 5 years old. You can see that the trunk does have a decent amount of girth. I've slip potted this along with many of the other trees that you see in this raised bed. Those are trees that we got after spring dormancy broke, and you don't want to generally work on trees from a root perspective after the buds have broke. So we didn't want to do that to this Dawn. Got it when it already was popping foliage, and as a result we kept it in a stable environment, didn't do any root work, but we did repot it, just a slip pot, right? A slightly bigger pot, add some bonsai soil, let it grow, and you can see how beautiful, again, this species foliage is in the spring. It's absolutely gorgeous. It does have some low growth down here, a couple of buds pushing that we're going to want to exploit over the years to thicken up that trunk. And this will be styled in a formal upright. Obviously it's very straight, conifer looking, but an absolutely beautiful tree that I'm really excited to work with over time. All right, this is our Mermaid Maple. This is an invasive species here in Michigan, and you can tell it's incredibly vigorous. This is the last tree that I bought at the Meyer Gardens All-State Show. A lot of this hasn't lignified, so we can't really make any cuts yet, but we need to prune this thing. It's going crazy. The trunk is very interesting. It's got one root that does come off to the side here. It's very pretty. I'll try and show that on the camera. And the trunk is pretty darn thick, but we need to make some decisions with a leader. So we'll cut that back soon. Alright, so for those of you that made it through the entire video, thank you so much for watching. For those of you that made it through 2, 5, 10 minutes, I appreciate you as well. If you did have any interest in the material that you saw, I will be posting updates on these as we go. And I'll also have a couple more videos coming out this summer, probably within the next 4 weeks. I've got the collection videos from this spring for the very large oak and elm that I showed you today, as well as the Trident Maple repot, root prune, trunk chop video that will be separate as well. And then we'll probably do a pruning video at some point once everything's lignified in later summer, as well as a fall update. No way it will be to the scale that this was or the length, but I'm glad that I got my entire collection on the record. So this is Great Lakes Bonsai. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day, and I hope you keep learning.